And hold on a second while I bring up our guest here. I'm going to move him to the webinar. And that should go here real quick. There he is. Hello, sir. All right. All right. Hey, my name is Chris Albrecht. Welcome to the Open Water webinar series. And you all are so lucky today because literally this man's book just came out yesterday, correct?
That is correct, Chris.
That's right. So this is hot off the presses, fresh content. Few people have read this book so far. You are getting an inside peek, and then you're going to rush off and go buy it, I presume, because it's really great. I am talking today, of course, with Professor Ilya Strebulaev of Stanford. He has just written a book about having a venture mindset. First, I want to welcome you to the program, Professor Strebulaev, and tell us a little bit, introduce yourself, tell us about professorship and how that led into this book.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be here. So I've been at Stanford for 20 years, and I'm a professor of finance. When I came to Stanford, I started teaching, benchmark 101 finance, as most junior professors do. What I realized very quickly is that those of my students who became venture capitalists or who became founders violated most of the finance rules I taught them. Okay. And I got intrigued by that because there were two options. One, they were all wrong and finance was right. Okay. Or there was another option, which is maybe finance is missing something. And so that's how I became interested in venture capital. And for the past 15 years, more or less, I've been concentrated on studying how venture capitalists make decisions and everything around startups, innovation, Silicon Valley, venture capital, etc. What I realized first is that the venture capital industry is extremely important for the economy. So do you know that every second public company in the US that became public in the last 50 years was venture-backed? Do you know that if you look out of top 10 companies by market cap right now, there are 7 or 8 companies that were venture-backed? And maybe most importantly, my research shows that had there been no venture capital industry in the US, most of those companies would not have existed. So our life would have been very different. We would have likely had no Apple, no Microsoft, no Nvidia, no Netflix, no Airbnb. We can continue the list. Now, that is the word venture. What I also found out in my research is that the venture capitalists, or smart of them, make decisions very, very differently. Moreover, what I found out is that leaders of venture-minded organizations also make decisions very differently, similar to how smart VCs make them. And so that is where the word mindset comes from. And with a former student of mine who is a venture builder at Amazon and other places, we wrote the book, The Venture Mindset, which is effectively summarizing and detailing those principles and specific practical behaviorals that you can take on to implement, to take on the venture mindset. But this book is not for venture investors, even though all my VC friends, in fact, a lot of VCs these days, now the book came out yesterday, they're all buying this in hundreds of copies to give to all their portfolio companies. And a lot of large companies, the CEOs of large companies, buying hundreds of books to give to every single of their decision makers. So to summarize, what is the venture mindset? Is the new mental model of how to make decisions in the innovation-driven, fast-changing, disruptive world.
Yeah, I want to make sure that we emphasize that, right? Like this is a book about having a venture mindset, a venture capitalist mindset. It's not about the venture capital industry. So we're not talking about like how to invest in something, deal structures, or, I mean, you touch on those things, right? But it's not about like how to become a VC. It's about how to think like one.
It is not. It is not how to become a VC. It is about how to make decisions better in any environment. And any environment where you have uncertainty, where you have potential for disruption. You have a potential for upending your industry. That is what the book is really about.
And what led you to believe? So you were doing this research, right? And so you found that. So what were sort of the things that sort of tipped you off that, hey, maybe we should pay attention to how VCs think? You pointed to sort of the number of companies that are on, right, the publicly traded companies like Apple, Facebook, right? Like those are all well enough reasons. But is there something in your research that you started thinking like, oh, wait, these people actually think differently than other investors in other sectors or other forms of investment?
Absolutely. So that's what the book really is about. The book is like 9 principles of the venture mindset, where
Yeah.
each principle is how really they think differently from, I think, most traditional investors or most traditional leaders. So I work a lot with the leaders of large companies, like the CEOs of or the C-suite of large global companies. Okay, let me mention a couple of examples.
Okay.
The first example is if you've ever been in a group making decisions, let's say in a large company, okay, or on the board, typically we try to work towards consensus. And consensus evolves naturally. In fact, there is research suggesting that evolutionary would benefit from consensus and from conformity. Okay. It turns out that in the venture mindset, you seek exactly the opposite of consensus. And the reason behind this is that when the situation you face is certain, where you actually know more or less what to do, where let's say the innovation is very incremental, it's great to have consensus. But once you face uncertainty, maybe you're trying to catch that outlier. You're trying to make a decision that will bring you a jackpot if if all goes according to the plan. VCs try to avoid consensus as much as possible. In fact, the principle that I call agree to disagree. And not only that, VCs follow a very specific rules. First, to bring all these disagreements. And second is to ensure that you can make a decision even if others disagree with you. Let me give you an example.
Mhm.
So there's a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley called Greylock. And some years ago, maybe 15 years ago, a partner at Greylock, his name is Reid Hoffman, came to his board, his investment committee meeting, and said, guys, I've met these amazing founders, 2 founders, and their startup is they can allow strangers to sleep on the sofa in your living room overnight and pay for it. Everybody
Yes.
looked at him in the room and said, this is crazy. Like, we will never allow strangers to sleep in a sofa in my living room, okay? Even if they pay us millions of dollars. The point is that would have been the end of the story in the traditional organization. You know, somebody's excited about this, everybody else is against. That's that, okay? In fact, the consensus is against the deal. Now, what Greylock has, in fact, is a kind of what is more or less could be called the anti-veto rule, which means that, you know, it's enough for one partner to be truly excited to go ahead. And so Reid Hoffman did go ahead and invest, even though his partners were against. And it turns out to be that it was a pretty good investment. It was Airbnb, okay? But that seemed crazy at the time. So that's the whole point, is that Airbnb was such an outlier that people could not really appreciate, especially if you're a pretty rich investor, okay?
Yeah.
Like why would you ever think of Uber if you have a private driver? That is the same idea. So agree to disagree implementation means that in the group, you would like to foster disagreements and you would like to allow people to experiment and to make some decisions, even if the majority is against the decision.
How much of that is, do you think, nature? So you've identified that VCs, especially the successful ones that you talk about, think differently than other people, and you lay out the 9 principles. But I want to, before we dig into that a little bit, what I want to, is this a nature versus nurture kind of thing? Did you find that, so someone like Reid Hoffman, right? Was there just something in his background, or was there something in his nature that sort of leads people to think differently?
That is a great question, Chris. I find that it's mostly about nurture. Now, I'm biased. I'm a professor. I nurture people, okay, day and night. And I believe I nurtured them pretty well. I had more than 3,000 students at Stanford
Wow.
that graduated from my classes, and hundreds of them became founders of venture-backed companies, and hundreds of them became venture capitalists. So I think nurture plays a very large role. I do believe that you can nurture to follow the venture minds principles. Now, how do I know this? When you just look at VCs, it's actually difficult to judge on this, okay? Because you observe them already when they have the venture mindset. But as I mentioned, I work with a lot with large companies, and I see how they make decisions, how they change themselves. Let me give you another example, okay? Simple. The principle is called getting outside the four walls. Now, I led a strategic offsite with the C-suite, top management of about maybe 60 people of one of the top global financial institutions. All extremely smart, very sophisticated executives, okay? And then we did a lot of things with them. One thing I did was I just asked them, so how many of you talked to your customer? When was the last time you talked to your customer? There was a complete dead silence. And then one guy said, well, I talked to my wife yesterday and, she's our customer. I said, no, 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 no. When you talk to your customer, who is just your customer, okay? It turns out to be that, senior executives don't work with customers. That's a mistake.
Yeah.
You have to know your customer. You cannot delegate this to anybody. Do you know that in Amazon, for example, if you're hired as a executive vice president, like a big boss, do you know what you first do? You go and spend time, maybe a week, maybe more than a week, in the warehouse. You just see it, how it works, okay?
Yeah.
So getting outside of the four walls, meaning get outside your office. By the way, you cannot find VCs in their office. They are there just once a week.
Yeah.
For the rest of the time, you're much more likely to find them in a coffee shop or in a fair event. They're trying to find opportunities. I think it should be the same with most of us. Do you know that here's the change I've made myself right away after I learned about the Venture Minds principles myself, okay? Now, Chris, I presume that you travel. I presume that our audience travels all the time.
Sure.
So I travel all the time. So how I used to travel? Well, I had my earphones. I have my iPad with all this, research articles or books I have to read, etc. Okay, well, very exciting. I never talked to anybody on my plane rides. Do you know that these days I completely changed? I have a goal now. Every single time I take a flight, I must talk meaningfully to at least 4 people whom I don't know otherwise, and try to form a connection. What I found out is that as in the VC world, sometimes it leads to amazing opportunities.
All right. Well, that's all right. I think that's a good idea, right? Like I'm always loath to talk to somebody on an airplane because I figure they want to do, which is just put in their headphones, catch up on their Netflix and keep going. But I guess if, I imagine if you're a nice person and you're professional, then maybe you can strike up. I have met interesting people on planes, so that does make sense.
So I met well, not just met interesting people, but sometimes they're so interesting that, let me just give you an example. Recently I was flying from New York and I started talking to the guy, and it turns out to be that he is a journalist covering horse racing. He just was flying from Dubai, where he was covering the Dubai World Cup. Now, one of the principles of the venture mindset is bet on the jockey, not just the horse. What I really mean by that, or what we mean by that in the book, is that, in the venture mindset, you think that it's important about the idea, the horse, but it's even more important who is going to implement it, the jockey, like the founder, the founding team, okay? And I think that's a very important principle to take on board, especially if you are in a medium-sized or large company. And for a couple of hours, we talked to him about what's more important, jockey or the horse. And now I think he's going to write a piece in this horse racing magazine of his, which is very, very, very popular, about the difference between the venture capitalist, the venture mindset, the difference and similarities between the venture mindset and the world of horse racing. Serendipity, yes, but trust me, even several years ago, I would not have done it.
Right. Serendipity requires a certain amount of action. It's not going to just come to you.
Louis Pasteur, the very famous 19th century French scientist, said that the chance favors those with a prepared mind.
Sure.
And so you need to have the prepared mind. And one of the points of the prepared mind is that you have to follow certain behaviors, certain rules. And that is what the venture mindset tries to help you with. Just to think about some of them very simple to implement, some of them more difficult, okay? But all of those are specific behaviors, specific actions that you can take to make better decisions.
All right. I want to gently, because you're a guest, push back on the notion and the entire premise of the book, right?
Okay.
Talk with founders. they are oftentimes like VCs are Viper. They are Vipers, right? Like, and among other nasty names that they have caused, almost as much harm as good in the billions for every Apple. There's billions that were wasted on crypto. Right now, we can argue about things coming back on that. But the point is, right, like you could say that to your point, to them, the misses don't matter, right? It's the home runs, which is a principle you have in your book. And part of me wonders, like, well, it's kind of easy to be bold when you're playing with other people's money. I realize that's very kind of glib and reductive, right? But they don't, it's not like I imagine that they might be more conservative if they were spending money that was in their own bank account. So why do you think we should sort of emulate in the way we approach our mindset this group of people?
Yeah. First of all, Chris, thanks for pushing back. I love when I'm pushed back because that creates an interesting atmosphere. Now, finally, it's interesting to listen to this discussion. Do you know that people who I think find it very useful to follow the venture mindset when I talk to them, and I gave a number of webinars now, are the angel investors. So the angel investors who invest typically before the VCs step in, and they invest their own money. Okay. In fact, I asked one angel recently, so do you have any investors? Or we call them LPs, limited partners. And they said, oh, yes, my wife. Okay. And this, in fact, they should follow the venture mindset even more than VCs in many ways, because they face even more uncertain situations because they invest earlier. Now, going back to, you made 2 points, Vipers and crypto. They're different, I think. First, Vipers. The truth is that if you have the venture mindset, it doesn't mean that you have to be gentle. You have to be tough. Okay. And one of the principles in the book we discuss in great detail is double down or quit. So here are the statistics. And I'm the founder of the Venture Capital Initiative at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford. So we have really fantastic data on the venture-backed companies. My statistics tells you is that VCs on average will not invest again in every second company they backed. So startups raise money all the time, and VCs say no half of the time. And obviously, from the founder point of view, very often that's kind of tough. Okay. Now, but I think all of us have to learn from this, because unless you focus on your winners, not only you will lose effort and time and money on your losers, but you will have less time and effort to spend on your winners. So let me give you my own example, okay? Not about VCs, not about angels. I'm a professor at Stanford. Do you know the single biggest mistake I had been making when I was a junior professor? And I'm a very creative guy, okay? Quite knowledgeable, obviously. Consider myself a very smart dude. So I came to Stanford very excited, and I started a lot of projects. And by the way, there were so many fantastic PhD students. I worked with them, okay? And now, 6 months later, many of those projects were not working out. And what did I do? I doubled down. I said, well, I'm very smart and I'm commitment to this student. Let me work more and more. So in fact, I think I did not do the students any favor, and I did not do myself any favor. I did not choose the right time to quit the project. As a result of that, I spent less time on the winning projects, and the losing projects did not succeed anyway. So as I looked back, when I learned about the venture minds principles myself, I actually looked back, I kept statistics on those projects, okay? Had I had this 50% rule, which is, you start 20 research projects, in 6 months to a year, you actually must cancel 10 of them.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you look at, for example, Reed Hastings, who is the founder and until recently the CEO of Netflix, he has the following rule. It's a famous quotation from him, which is, we have to be more successful. To be more successful, we need to have a higher cancel rate, which means that more of Netflix projects have to be canceled.
Yeah.
Now, from this point of view, yes, VCs might look like vipers. I actually hope that all of us will look like vipers towards ourselves. On crypto, yes, it is true that, many crypto investments were not successful. And yes, it is true that the maybe a very important principle in the venture mindset is home runs matter, strikeouts don't. But I think even more fundamentally, when you face a large degree of uncertainty, you just don't know what is going to succeed, what is not going to succeed. And it is very unpopular to say so now, but I actually think the world of crypto, or rather not the cryptocurrencies like a Bitcoin, but the world of blockchains and what will come out of it, I think that there's going to be much larger impact that many people expect now. So VCs are trying to catch on something that might potentially turn out to be great. So right now, obviously, it is happening with AI, okay? And again, you might think, well, maybe AI is going to turn the next crypto. Some of those bubbles burst, and yes, you lose money. But on average, if you look at, first of all, as an investor, the venture performance, it's been really pretty good historically, better than the market. But I think more importantly, in terms of impact on us, I find it very difficult to compare with anybody else. And so applying this to our own decision making, whether in personal life and professional life, I think we can achieve the same impact in our lives.
Okay. I want to, before we keep going, I want to make sure if you have a question in the audience, you can submit it to the Q&A, and I will forward it on. I wonder, as we're talking about this, right? Because in an interview that I helped conduct many years ago with Bill Gurley, he, famous VC Bill Gurley, right? He said the only way you can make money is if you bet the right way, counter to what everybody else is doing, right? And so I'm wondering if in your research about VCs, you noticed anything about like super VCs, like, there are people that come to mind, right? Which is like Bill Gurley, Draper, right? Like you can go through, and they're drawing a blank on them right now, but is there a way to, like, did you almost winnow to figure out like, okay, well, there's a venture mindset, and then these super VCs have this additional layer on top?
Well, I think the super VCs are those that just follow all the principles of the venture mindset. And Chris, it's not that easy to follow those principles. It's tough.
Sure.
Okay, it's tough. It's tough to disagree with your partners all the time and create rules around that. It is tough to kill, okay, a lot of your projects. It is very tough. Like kill your darlings is a tough proposition. And
Yeah.
so you have to be tough to follow those venture mindset principles. Unless you do, I think that you are less likely to be successful. So a lot of people ask me, and I think that is really what you're asking me, kind of in a way. So is it true that some VCs just become lucky? And I think the difference between super VCs and just VCs with great returns is that super VCs are not driven by luck. And here is my definition of luck so that it's easy to understand for everybody. If you go out, Chris, after this webinar and buy a lottery ticket, and tomorrow you win a jackpot, I would say that's luck. But if next week you go out, Chris, and you buy another lottery ticket and win your jackpot for the second time, I'll say it's a great skill in playing lottery. So what we say about super VCs is that again and again, they achieve those jackpots. And the way they achieve those jackpots is, so they all concentrate on home runs. They understand that you need to embrace failures. If there are not enough strikeouts in your portfolio, you will never be able to catch a home run. I can tell you, I recently consulted with a very large venture firm that was worried about its performance. And one conclusion I made when I looked at the data is I said, look, guys, you know what? You used to be a venture capital firm, and now, because of the way that you change decisions, or process of how to make decisions, you actually look like less of a venture capital firm. You are now fearful of strikeouts, and you see this in the outcomes. But as a result of that, you don't have home runs. And I think that is very damning, especially for many large organizations. They are worried about failures. And unless you embrace this, you will never be able to achieve home runs. So that is one example of the difference between super VCs and everybody else.
So let's talk about the home runs matter, strikeouts don't run. That, right? That's one of the 9 principles you lay out. It's not a spoiler. It's right in the beginning of the book. Everyone should take a look. I'm just saying that because it kind of drives me crazy in interviews when they give away so much of the book. You'd be like, well, I don't need to buy the book now, but you should go out and definitely check out the book. Is home run strikeouts don't, right? I can see that as a VC, but how would I, as like a regular person in a company, how do I apply that lesson to my everyday life so that I can have that mindset?
So first, ask a question or questions differently when you approach any new project. Okay, so whenever you approach any new project to pursue, so either when you work in your company, Chris, or in fact when you're applying for a job, let's say, typical question is, why should I do it? Right? Now, VCs actually don't ask this question. When they approach the potential investment opportunity for the first time, they ask a different question. They ask, why should I not do it? Or why should I not even think about thinking about this? And trust me, and I've been practicing this now for several years, when you approach this question, which is, why should I not do it? Your decision-making will change. And you're just more likely to catch a home run just by doing this, because you will say no to more projects. Second, when you approach a project that you already decided upon, which is you already invested time, effort, or money, and you now have to make a decision whether to allocate more time or effort, okay? This is where what psychologists call, we're all in the escalation of commitment, which is we're prepared to throw good money after bad money. We are prepared like amateur poker players who have chips on the table and the cards reveal, the hand reveal is very poor, but they continue to play, okay? And that is very tough. Now, VCs face it every single day, and they developed methods. One realization of this is that I concluded that, just trying to tell yourself that, well, I'm going to do it differently this time. I'm going to avoid this commitment to pursuing bad projects. That does not work.
Okay.
Good intentions do not work. It's all about behaviors. It's all about design. So VCs design it. And how, Chris, you can do it right away in your life is, so whenever you can think about whether to put more effort or money into something that you already decided in the past and already spent a lot of money effort, VCs try to find somebody external, somebody else, and you should seek somebody. When you look at successful CEOs, it's interesting that, one feature that distinguishes them, which many people don't notice, is that they have trusted advisors who are not their employees, because these CEOs are very lonely people. It's a very lonely job. Either it's one of their board members, or maybe their friend who knows enough about their company, but not that much.
Yeah.
And who can provide an external piece of advice. And you follow that piece of advice because they will help you to decide. So many VCs will say, we will not invest in the same deal again unless we find somebody else who will be willing to invest with us.
Sure.
So that is something specific that all of us, I think, can use. You don't need to be an investor for this.
So as you mentioned, you are a professor at Stanford, and I'm wondering, I'm going to shift gears here a little bit. I'm wondering, how many of your students have you noticed are looking to get into just the venture capital business? And has that changed over the past, let's say, 5 years, or 10 years, whatever? Have you noticed that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, is that I developed and I've been teaching the venture capital class, and the venture capital class became very, very popular. Last time we had 240 people on the wait list. So in fact, even if you become a Stanford student, it doesn't guarantee you that you can take this class. That's, again, one of the reasons for writing this book, so to open this to a lot more people. Now, I had thousands of students who graduated. And I already mentioned I had hundreds of students who became founders of venture-backed companies, hundreds of students who became VCs. And yes, in the past 5 years, I think there are more and more students who would become founders. and VCs, but specifically founders. There's a reason behind that, Chris, which I think fundamental, and people need to understand this. This is also why we're now having this AI revolution, and most people don't really understand the fundamentals behind it. The single most important fundamental, that it is much cheaper to experiment with a new business model in many industries. And here is my story. When I came to Stanford 20 years ago in 2004, okay, my very, very, very first students with whom I got close, and that back then I didn't know anything about startups, but they were working on a startup, okay, software startup. And in order to proceed after they graduated, they needed to raise $5 million. Why? Because they needed to get all those computers. There was no cloud,
Sure.
no Wi-Fi. They need to hire developers in Silicon Valley. Okay, there's no outsourcing. They had to get those expensive Oracle system, if you still remember that, okay? And by the way, after they hired those 12 developers, they had to hire an accountant, an HR person, a lawyer, etc. And 18 months later, $5 million was out of the bank, and they had to raise again. And they achieved the prototype. Well, they maybe achieved already the several first customers in their B2B business. And by the way, they became successful. These days, Chris, if you're a student, a full-time Stanford GSB student, not an alumni, you can achieve the same on almost, shoestring budget, like $50,000 or less.
Yeah.
As there is, and I observe the same happening with hardware as we speak. I observe the same happening with biotech as we speak. Okay, so this is everything. This is what's happening behind AI. So it's now much easier to experiment and try to catch a home run. By the way, here is something to remember. I expect, I already see this in the data, a much higher failure rate going forward. But that's not because the Silicon Valley business model doesn't work. That's actually because it's now going to work much faster and much more effective.
Yeah. I think that's interesting. I want to just touch on that really quick. Back in the late aughts, I guess, like 2007 era, right? 2010, there was all this, people were trying to replicate what's happening in Silicon Valley. And I interviewed, he's not a direct colleague of yours, but someone else who had taught at Stanford, Steve Blank. And he said, everybody keeps trying to create Silicon Alley or Silicon Rust Belt or whatever, right? And he said the biggest point they miss is that Silicon Valley has the convergence of money, schools, and just like business infrastructure. That's not the same anywhere else. Is that sort of in line with your thinking as we're trying to, so like somebody who's in a more remote area might need more of a venture mindset because they don't have all of those resources like within, a 20-mile radius?
Well, first of all, Steve Blank is a dear friend. He, in fact, posted yesterday when my book was released a LinkedIn piece about the book, recommending everybody to buy it.
Give the name of your book again real quick so people can remember.
The Venture Mindset. Just go on Amazon or elsewhere, type The Venture Mindset, and that's going to be, I'm sure, the first book you see. So in fact, Steve Blank, is the leading the Gordon Knott Center at Stanford now for defense innovation, and he recommending this book to everybody there, like to the Department of Defense, because they need to acquire the venture mindset. Going back to your question, Chris, I agree, but I would add something. It is true that the success of Silicon Valley is all about the critical mass of conflicts of many things at the same time. But I think there is something else, which is how all those people making decisions, or who makes decisions, and what kind of incentives everybody has. So in fact, I went around the world and I studied how all those Silicon Alleys are being built. And they typically built top down. Nobody tried to build Silicon Valley top down, okay? It kind of came together, bottom up. It doesn't mean that you cannot build top down. But typically when you build top down, and I talk to a lot of regulators trying to make too many decisions themselves. So the moment a bureaucrat is making a specific portfolio investment decision, I would say that is the end of the Silicon Alley, Silicon replication story. Okay, that is the end. So in fact, I think that regulators need to acquire those venture mindset principles. And one of the principles is you need to give your people who make decisions a freedom to make mistakes, to experiment a lot. You do not need to make, in fact, you cannot make decisions for them. You rather need to build what we call in the book rail tracks. And large companies do it very successfully. They build rail tracks so that their employees can experiment, and some of those employees become very successful intrapreneurs, building projects inside the company. And it's exactly the same about trying to build an innovation ecosystem. But you know what? If you are a government leader, it's very difficult to give up your own right to make decisions.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to end on sort of a different note. And I want to thank you for your time today. Like I said, go find The Venture Mindset, on sale now at Amazon, all kinds of places. Venture Mindset by Professor Ilya Strebulaev, sorry. God darn, I'm sorry, I'm
I
mispronouncing your
can
name.
pronounce my name myself in English, so that's okay. That's okay. You're forgiven.
All right. One, it was your birthday recently, so happy belated birthday. What
Thank you.
a great way to celebrate is with your book coming out and all these people rushing out and buying it. But two, I know the book was born out of wine. And in particular, like you and your co-writer on this, or Alan Yang, I believe it was, who was a former student, right?
Yeah, Alex.
Were I believe cataloging your wine one night, and that's sort of how this came about. So I want to, before you leave, what's a wine recommendation you can make right now? We're heading in the summer. Give me both a white and maybe a red that you're liking right now.
Okay, fantastic. First of all, Chris, is that exactly my former student when the COVID pandemic started. I decided finally there's a good time to catalog my wine cellar because it was a complete mess. And we spent hours in a very cold environment. My wine cellar is 53, 54 degrees. So we were all dressed up, okay? And we spent hours there. And so we talked about this. And so we started talking about the venture minds, because obviously he took my class. Okay. So indeed, this book was born out of wine. Now, again, use venture mindset when you approach wine consumption. So here's how I'm going to do it. What I used to do is I used to drink specific stuff. When I go to a restaurant, I would know what I like. These days, when I go to a restaurant, Chris, okay, my purpose is, in fact, because wine also is very expensive in restaurants. Didn't you notice this? In fact, I go through the wine list and I always choose something I've never tried before.
Okay.
And that actually works wonderfully. So I'm not going to tell you which specific winery to try, even though I have many friends here in Santa Cruz Mountains, just about 10 miles from where I am right now, in the Stanford office, that are doing amazing stuff. So if you want to try something that is really amazing, try the Pinot Noir and the Chardonnay from Santa Cruz Mountains. There are it's called Santa Cruz Appellation. There are a lot of amazing wineries, but try to experiment. Get outside the four walls. If you always drink Chardonnay and go to a restaurant, don't drink Chardonnay. If you always drink California Cab in a restaurant, follow my principle. Never order a Californian Cab in a restaurant. Experiment.
All right. One could tie that back. That's going for home runs and not being afraid of strikeouts, right? Tying it all back in. There, look at how the venture mindset works.
You never know what you discover. This is my last story, Chris. We went to a restaurant recently, and I tried a dry Hungarian Tokai. Have you ever tried dry Hungarian Tokai? I mean, me neither before that.
I don't know if I've ever tried sweet Hungarian Tokai. So
well, sweet Hungarian Tokai is more well known, kind of, but dry.
Okay.
That was one of the discoveries of the year. So now I came home. I immediately went on Wine Searcher, which is the website for wine, and I tried to find all these dry Hungarian Tokai available in the United States. That was like a discovery. Wow! But it would never happen had I not followed the venture mindset principles in my wine consumption.
Going for that home run. All right, Professor Ilya Strebulaev, thank you so much for being a part of this. The book is The Venture Mindset. Go look it up on Amazon. Go buy 3. Professor Strebulaev, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody. Bye for now.